I want to do for you, as we always do on PM Express, is to drill down. You've heard the headlines, you've heard the surface argument. Let's drill down to the actual facts of what the report actually says and what it actually measures, so we can ask some real questions, both of the journalists and of those who work in the space with us and help protect all journalists and make our work safer. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to be spending some time drilling down the actual facts of the report that was published today. And so we are going to look at this. That's why we are going to be looking at the reality check. We're going to do some reality check of the report itself, a check on the reality when it comes to what persists and pertains in the work of the press, and also whether what we read in the report is a reflection of the reality as we all practice in Ghana. So let's spend some time with me. And my guests are joining me. They know their stuff to help me break this down even further. But if you look at the report on the surface, it says we are ranked now at 60 out of 180 countries. And we've done a lot of comparison to the previous years. And we make the point that it's the lowest since we placed 66th in 2005. That is a 17-year low. And so this is quite significant. However, there's something that I wanted to note when we make this point. Part of the reason why we are drilling down, because we had to go to the actual page of the report, just drill this down a bit more to understand whether indeed it is accurate to necessarily make this comparison in terms of the trends, considering that we realize that if you look at the methodology, there's a significant change in the way the authors of this report had measured the key items before this latest report. And so there's a significant change there. And we found an interesting caution that they themselves have put out that I need to bring to your attention. This is it. This is something that we took from the actual document on the methodology, breaking down what the methodology says, and a caution to readers. It says, in light of this new methodology, and I'll break down for you from the website what the new methodology is. In light of this new methodology, care should be taken when comparing the 2022 rankings and scores with those from 2021. And they go into a bit more detail. So that for us was one of the key things to note, right? Because we want to really be factual about this. And so that is the notes there that the authors put to this in the press freedom rankings. Now, before I even come back to, nonetheless, in spite of the caution though, we still needed to give you a sense of what the trend had been. Bear in mind that caution. So that caution then helps you appreciate it. And that's why we put a big red mark here in our analysis. Let's show the caution again to explain why we do this. The caution is to say there's a new methodology that has just been implemented that produced this result, right? And the authors of the report says care should be taken when comparing the 2022 rankings and scores with those of 2021. I presume it will apply to the years prior. And so let's come back to our trend that my researchers put together for us. If you look at the trend, and by the way, the score 60, the lower the score you have, the better you're doing in terms of press freedom, right? And that's why 60 is so alarming. And this is, if you look at this, this is a 100% drop, right? That's a rank. The rank you have, your rank is, the higher your rank, of course, the worse that the issues are when it comes to local press freedom conversations. And you look at the comparison, our rank currently is 60, but last year we were at 30. That's why you've heard people say it is a 100% drop, right? But if you take that in the holistic conversation about the caution, then you begin to see why we put the red mark here. And we'll come to that conversation about what the methodology says shortly. And so you see this red mark. But if you compare, we have been moving in and out. Our best performance, if you look at it in 2018, we ranked 23rd in the world, right? That is very good. In fact, we were the first on the continent. And then we did a bit terribly. We started doing terribly. So from 2018, when we did fantastic, we did this, climb back up again in terms of the rankings to 27 to 30th. And so we were not doing well compared to our best performance in 2018. But if you go back to 2015, we had We have 22 ranking 2. So that there too, we did some very good work, right? And we've been in and out. So we've been recording 30 in the last 2 years. We maintained 2020, 2021, and then we've gone here, right? So this is key to observe where we've been and our performance over the period. Now, so talking about methodology, what is it that they were measuring when it comes to this? And what were our individual scores on these key areas? And I want to quickly bring that to your attention before we come to the other key issues. And by the way, in the last few minutes, government has released a very important statement on this matter that will again bring to your attention. Now, this is what they were measuring in terms of the key factors. So they're measuring political indicator, economic indicator, legislative indicator, social indicator, and security. This is on the website of the Reporters Without Borders, and they put this together. I want to expand this a bit more so you see. So if you break this down, remember that our overall ranking was 60, and then we were 30 last year. Political indicator, we scored 66%, so that's above average. If you look at economic indicator, which is the economic circumstances we find ourselves in, the government policies, etc., that economically affects the journalists, so in terms of our relationship with advertisers, our ability to do our work because we are poorly paid is a very important point. We're measuring that. And that appears to be our lowest score yet in terms of the rate that we got there, 47%. If you compare that to, say, legislative indicator, which is a very good score of 81. So we're doing very well when it comes to legislation that encourages the work of journalists, right information, etc., that we've passed, right? So the score is very highly. Social indicators, the pressure that we are getting from society, churches, etc., in doing our work. Again, we don't do badly because I have 79. So we're doing very fairly in the social indicators. And then security, that is the safety of the journalists. Are the journalists being assaulted? Are they beating? Do they feel safe? We are 62 again. So that is also above average. So you see that if you look at the actual scores, the problem that we begin to have is the economic indicator, which is the lowest one. So that will definitely drag us into the red significantly. So we'll talk about that with the journalists who are joining us, about the economic conditions that journalists have to work in, poorly paid, susceptible to advertisers' control, that influences the quality of your work. And that shows this. So now you begin to understand why we were ranked the way we were ranked. So it was not all negative, to be fair, because if you look at the legislative indicator, we are doing 81, social indicator 79, and then you're doing 66 political indicator and security, but then very poorly on economic indicator. So we'll come to that. But I want to do something also in terms of, so what did it that they measured last year? And why was it different from this year? If you go back to last year, they were measuring some different things. Pluralism was something that they measured last year that they didn't measure this year. Media independence, environment and self-censorship. Although they mentioned in the explanation that self-censorship is a key thing this year too, but it wasn't an item they actually measured and asked questions on in the methodology. Legislative framework is one of the key things that is common between last year and this year. And then you have transparency that they also measure. Then infrastructure is one of the key things they measure as well last year, and abuses of journalists. So you see that the thing they measured last year different from this year. And that is why they issued that caution that be careful in comparing, because we've changed the way we measure the key items that we put out. So that was one of the first things that we wanted to draw your attention to in terms of the key things that we noticed that may have influenced why we were ranked the way we were ranked. Now, back to the key issues that I was talking about. If you look at how Africa is performing to the rest of the world, you will notice here that whereas Seychelles is the best performing on the continent at 13th, right? That's global, right? They were first on the continent. Come to Ghana. We used to hold this position, by the way. We used to be the first on the continent in 2018. We've dropped to 10th now on the continent, so that isn't good. But if you look at the net loss, the worst loss is Cape Verde, right? That doing -9, Ghana is doing -30. Again, put that in the context of the caution that Reporters Without Borders has given you because of the change in methodology, okay? So that is also important. And globally, you're seeing journalists killed, etc., 29. Now, in the last few minutes, the government has issued a statement on this, a reaction to the issues, right? And I've talked about some of the key issues that were important to our current score of 60 political contests, to protect their jobs and their security, and this is important. They increasingly, that's journalists, those who work in the press, they increasingly resort to self-censorship as the government shows itself intolerant of criticism. So this is a verdict of the authors of this report, and they have a panel that looks into this and do a very good job in terms of methodology and the research that they put in. So saying this is actually a big indictment. The government is intolerant of criticism, and then 1/3 of media outlets are owned by politicians and by people tied to the top political parties, and that tells you then they have a bit of influence on content, etc. You have safety context, which you've talked about. If you look at the safety score, we're just above 60. It's not terrible, but indeed it's still an issue, right? So it's not as an individual score. Legal framework is where we score very highly, above 80, so there's been a lot of improvement in the legal framework. Now, this is a government reaction, and I want to bring that to you. This government, in the last few minutes, literally, just before we came on air, issued this statement. And government said a few things that I want to bring to your attention before I bring my guests in, because this has just been issued. This is a copy that was just handed to me just before I came on air. Government says it is important to emphasize that the change in methodology, and they also reference that, significantly accounted for the drop in ranking for a number of countries, including Netherlands. And again, if you check the facts of the Reporters Without Borders, this checks out, right? Due to this development, 4 of the countries, Netherlands, Jamaica, Switzerland, New Zealand, ranked top 10 previously, significantly dropped in ranking, slumping out of the top 10 in year under review, right? But the key question you need to ask is, you've seen the methodological questions, but what about the journalists themselves? Now that you know what the breakdown is, does this reflect the reality you've heard, and does it reflect the reality we live as journalists? We'll come to ask them their own views of this very shortly. The government reaction says it's also worthy to note that Ghana's dip in ranking was largely influenced by 2 of the new parameters. This is government reaction: the economic context and the safety of journalists. Those were the places we scored the lowest, right? So government says those are the key areas that caused our decline. Now, on the safety of journalists, it's imperative to note that an activity that may feed into the assessment of press freedom includes actions by non-state actors. This government is saying that it is not necessarily state actors that are doing this, but non-state actors. Also striking that a new report also looked into considerations for the effect of opinion media and propaganda, disinformation, and fake news. This is a government position on this. The government then highlights what they believe to be the positive aspects of this, which I have highlighted in terms of the media, their regulation, the regulatory framework, the legal framework, political context, social context, where they score high. But the negative, this is the thing, government admits though. Government admits that Ghana's performance on safety of journalists leaves room for improvement. So this is a government admitting that on the safety of journalists, there's room for improvement. There's a problem there. And Ghana's performance on the economic context is also very poor. This is a government statement, and must equally be reserved, right? So they need to do something about it. So these 2 things government admit is a problem. Safety of journalists, economic conditions within the journalists are operating, the government says is a key problem. Now, another thing that I quickly want to draw your attention to in the government statement that came through is the bit about what government says they want to do. So government admits there's a problem. So what is government saying they will do? If you look at the government statement, the Information Ministry, and this is signed by Kojo Nkrumah, lists a few things they want to do on the back of the poor performance that we've seen this year. 1, work in collaboration with the National Media Commission to deepen execution of the coordinated mechanism on safety of journalists, which was established, by the current Information Minister. Collaborate with stakeholders, including civil society organizations, in deepening education for state and non-state actors on the safety of journalists. Then to address the report, and a concern about poor economic conditions of most journalists in the country, government will continue to engage with media associations, including media owners, to improve the working and economic conditions of journalists, collaborate with stakeholders in the fight against disinformation and spread of fake news. So, in essence, government says we didn't do poorly in every area. We admit that there were areas that we did poorly. However, we commit to do a set of things to improve our score and the environment for press. So that's the government position. Let me bring in my guest, since this is just coming in, and get a quick reaction before I get into some of the substantive details as you've now learned.